So just if I can grab your attention. Can you hear me? Perfect. Feel free to tell me if this is too loud also. All right. Hello everyone again, and I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jumanah. I'm the ALUS Elgin Program Coordinator, and I want to welcome you all to the Growing Biodiversity Conference. It's amazing to see so many people here in person and so many people of us joining in online as well. We're very excited to have you here to celebrate our program's 10th and 5th anniversaries, and we're very much looking forward to the amazing lineup of speakers we have today. But before we get too far, just have a few housekeeping items. So the washrooms are located just behind the seating area to the left. There is water available just outside the patio doors in the steel buckets full of ice. So they should be nice and cool. And for those of us joining online, we have staff monitoring the chat. So feel free to throw in your questions there if you have any, and we'll address them as soon as we can. So thank you again for spending some time with us here today, and we want to acknowledge the contributions from World Wildlife Fund Canada, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, ALUS Canada, and the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority for making this conference possible. And today, as we gather and talk about stewardship in what is now Elgin and Middlesex counties, we acknowledge the original stewards of the land as we stand and sit in the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples. We can look to the 7th generation principle of the Haudenosaunee people, which recognizes our responsibility to future generations. The Haudenosaunee traditional knowledge and connections guide the use of land and resources. Through the practice of active listening and understanding the environment, its diverse and interconnected processes and cycles, traditional management techniques safeguard the biodiversity of our local environments. These principles and knowledge continue being relevant and are implemented by the many Indigenous peoples here today, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of society. As we continue our efforts to heal our environments, seeking guidance from Indigenous communities and their keepers, or seeking guidance from Indigenous knowledge and their keepers to direct our actions has never been more necessary. ALUS Elgin and ALUS Middlesex are committed to building respectful relationships with Indigenous communities and to continue seeking their involvement in our program's delivery. We commit to being accountable towards Indigenous people and communities and affirm the importance of what they share with us. And we commit to learn about oppression and privilege, about Indigenous peoples and culture, about the land that we live on, and to listen. We will now have the privilege of learning and listening from Sam Whiteye, the Indigenous Partnership Specialist with Carolinian Canada and a proud member of the Delaware Nation. Please welcome Sam to the stage here. Oh, up? There we go. Okay. So,
Kingwanao Lomwa, Ani Sabuli, Ni Shinzi Howe Shopako, Ni Nonjai Alapawi Lakawi, Ni Nangwamawak Takwa, Nin Nintalapawi. Hello everyone, my name is Sam Whiteye. I come from Delaware Nation at Moravian Town, or Alapawi Lakawi. I am Turtle Clan, and today I am representing Carolinian Canada as the Indigenous Leadership Specialist. I want to acknowledge the human beings and the ones who take care of our mother, and have done so since time immemorial, the Anishinaabe, the Unyata'aga, and the Lunapawak. Today, you know them as Chippewa of the Thames, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. I know them as the keepers of the faith, the people of the standing stone, and he or she who came from thought, because that is the understanding of our roles and responsibilities as people. I also want to honor the agreement between the nations of the One Dish, One Spoon Wampum Belt. I want to plant a seed of acknowledgement and understanding for our Mother Earth and the people. I'm calling on you to continue to learn this in the territories you reside in and build that relationship. Today, I would like to share my understanding on biodiversity and what it means to me. Let's look at the definition of biodiversity. The Webster's Dictionary defines it as biological diversity in an environment as indicated by the numbers of different species of plants and animals. The word was created around 1985. However, Indigenous people have understood this concept on a deeper level since time immemorial. What biodiversity really is the relationships between all things. You can't understand relationships unless you understand where you come from. My late teacher, Bruce Stonefish, had this saying, and it was that you have to walk your teachings back to creation. But what does that mean exactly? If we look at creation and everything around us, we know that everything was here before the human beings were. All the animals, birds, insects, trees, grasses, and fish were here before us, and they all lived in balance with each other. They understood their relationships and relied on each other to sustain that balance. In my creation story, they say that when Creator had a vision for the human beings to come into existence, the rest of creation tried to speak up and say no. That they did not want the human beings to come here, and that they were fine here without us. The rest of creation understood that as human beings, we would need to rely on creation for everything. We would need food, heat, clothing, shelter, and medicine just to survive. And creation would have to sacrifice their lives for us, and it wouldn't stop there. Eventually, we would just take and take, not realizing what we were doing to the balance. Creator assured us that when we were created, we would follow our original instructions of honoring and respecting the relationships of everything around us. Anishik el-Milion yun-kwe kishwik, kishilamonkwang, Anishik el-Milion kakuna aki, wak mbi. Anishik el-Milion michwakin, wak ulamausawak. Anishik el-Milion ni nangwamawak, wak ni wikion, wak ni njosak, wak ni mbamausawakan. Anishik, Anishik, Anishik. When we speak our languages, we are acknowledging those relationships. Our language is rooted in life. They say when you speak my dialect specifically, there are certain sounds and inflections you make, and that's because when you speak my language, you are breathing life into the words. In fact, there is a word that speaks to that very action, the act of breathing life with all of creation, and that is what we consider sacred, is life, and all the things in creation that sustain life, the water, the earth, the moon cycles and sun, even the seasons. Our language also talks about those relationships among creation. For example, the word rain in my dialect is suklon. It doesn't just mean to rain. It translates as the weather that cleans or purifies. If we look at the word for north, it's lo wanawang, and it means pointing in the direction of winter. Many indigenous languages speak about our worldview and the relationships to everything around us. Indigenous people learn the landscapes they live on and the cycles of life. They learn which plant relatives were good for skin rashes and which medicines helped respiratory issues. We lived with creation and carried these understandings forward with each generation. And it was important that those oral and working knowledge systems of the land be passed on. And we express those understandings in so many ways. Reflecting on my own identity and relationship to the land, I know growing up that was the one consistent relationship I had in my life. I moved around a lot as a kid, but the land was always there for me. And believe me when I would say, I would spend hours outside playing, and completely content to learn the world around me. In my later years, unconsciously, I found myself living in homes close by the river. I would spend my time learning the waters and building that relationship. It was then that I found my love for landscape photography, and that love grew, and I was able to showcase my relationship to the land through my lens. All of the photography that you see in this presentation is from me. Today, as I walk forward with my identity as a leader and matriarch, I often think about this quote by Indigenous author Helen Knott. She said, "There is nothing like being present in a land that knows your name, knows your blood, and knows who your ancestors are." So when I see Indigenous folks reclaiming their connections to language and culture, they are really reclaiming their connection to the land and everything in creation. If we look at the history of the conservation sector, it is my understanding that Indigenous folks have been consistently left out of the conversation, that our traditional knowledge on plant and medicines were invalidated, just like our understandings of the relationships around us were invalidated unless scientifically proven. It is only recently that this trend is changing as science is catching up to Indigenous knowledge systems. However, historically, Indigenous peoples have always advocated for the land and waters. It is our responsibility as a people to advocate and remember the balance of creation. That's why today you will see the most biodiversity on the lands we steward, and Indigenous-led projects have had great success. As we look at the historical and present effects of colonization on biodiversity and the landscape, we cannot ignore the climate emergency we are heading into. You folks would know the science of this better than I, but I can speak to how creation is severely out of balance. No longer are we working with creation, but against it. However, I have hope that we can slow this trend if we change the approach to traditional conservation best practices, to land management, and policies that affect our soil, air, and water protections. In our communities, we talk about how Indigenous traditional knowledge and Western science need to come together with the understanding of respect, and that each knowledge system is equal. Two halves create a whole, and this is what we call a two-eyed seeing approach. I believe in Western science. Their research really helps us understand the details of this world, and I appreciate that. We have traditional knowledge shows us that humans are not separate from creation, but a part of it. We have the same rhythms and flows of everything around us. Utilizing the best of both knowledge systems and methods of stewardship requires collaboration, and that will not come easy. The conservation sector can learn that ethical space is the in-between. These are the conversations that are needed for the future of biodiversity, because it is up to us to slow the trends and safeguard our future generations so that they may come into creation that is thriving. Anishik, Miigwech, Yonko, thank you for having me speak.
Great, thank you very much, Sam. We do have a question, about 5 minutes we'll have for some questions to be asked, but we can hold that for the panel discussion as well, if you're interested. Are there any questions on the chat at all? Okay, perfect. We can move along and have any questions from the crowd answered at the panel discussion portion. I want to thank you again for the presentation. It was very honest and invaluable words that you shared there, and we want to continue the conversation about biodiversity and with a perspective from World Wildlife Fund with Ryan Godfrey coming up next. So, welcome Ryan to the stage.
Let's figure this out here. Oh, format. Okay. All right. We're in person. It's all good. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Here's me. My name is Ryan Godfrey. This is my favorite plant of all time, the evening primrose. That's I'm a botanist. That's the species group that I did my master's research on. I'm so happy in this picture because I've been looking for this plant for about 3 days in Missouri. Hadn't found it. Thought I was going to fail my master's. Then I found the plant, and we had a great time. It was wonderful. Next, that's what I've been doing for the past 2 years or so. On my balcony, I do have a GoPro strapped to my head there. And as you know, I've been bringing people to my personal garden, teaching them a little bit about how to grow native plants in an urban situation. My balcony is about 2 meters by 3 meters. I have 30 different species of native plants growing there, and they perenate. They come back every year. Some of them are over 7 years old now. So that's been my great pleasure. But it's wonderful to be here in person and virtual. Hi, virtual people too. Very, very cool that we're at this stage in the world. Next thing, please. And those are some of my plants, my friends, my deep friends. Sam talked about relationships between people and plants. I'm not sure that I am allowed to say that I'm a relative of these plants, but I do very sincerely believe them to be my friends. They are legitimately, I care about them, I learn about them, I spend a lot of time with these plants, and they affect me, they affect my life in a big way. I encourage everyone to do that to the extent possible. It really does. The plants can change you. So let's go on. Okay, let's start off with some definitions. I'd like to get on the same page with everybody. So a garden is, to me, any place where plants and people are in a reciprocal relationship. That's give and take in both directions, right? So you're given something, you're getting something, the plant is giving something and getting something. Lots of different ways that can play out. Ecology, that's the science that I studied, is the study or the existence of relationships. Sounds familiar? Between organisms and their environment. Okay? Next up, ecological restoration is assisting in the recovery of degraded or destroyed ecosystems for the benefit of humans and nature. So people are in that picture too, don't forget about it. Okay? There is no difference between humans and nature, actually, no distinction. We're part of the same system. Next, stewardship, the responsible use and protection of the natural environment through conservation and sustainable practices. Okay, we can all be doing this in some way, shape, or form. Even in a tiny little garden situation, you can do stewardship. Next, native plants. I'm going to be talking a lot about native plants. We're going to get a little bit more into this later, but for now, just know that these are the regional flora. They've evolved in situ for thousands of years. They have adapted to local conditions and co-evolved with other organisms, and for that reason, they are irreplaceable. You can't fake those thousands of years of evolved relationships. Next, please. A habitat is an area that contains all the features, or some of the features, essential to the life cycle needs of an organism. Okay, so my balcony, for example, it provides some habitat features, but not the entire thing for a whole bunch of different creatures. So, next up, a botanist, that's me. An expert or a student, I consider myself always a student, always learning, in the study of plants. You can call me a plant nerd. I'm your personal plant nerd today. You can ask me any plant nerdy questions you like. Next up, horticulture, not my specialty, but I kind of dabble in it, the art or practice of growing plants in gardens. And I added one for the audience today, agriculture, the science or practice of farming, including the cultivation of soil. Oh, don't forget about that thing that the plants grow in, including the growing of crops. Okay, so we're all on the same page now. Let's continue. Nature-based solutions. Okay, here we are. So Sam sort of set the stage here a little bit. We're in this situation. Biodiversity loss is happening. Some people are saying that we're in the 6th mass extinction event in all of biological history. Not a great situation. Climate change is also happening. And these things, because in ecology, everything is linked to everything else, these things are linked to each other. So as one advances, the other also advances. It also means that there are certain solutions which can benefit both the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis at the same time. Everything I talk about in this talk is of that nature. And at WWF, we call those nature-based solutions. So they involve mitigation as well as adaptation. Those may be terms that you're familiar with, maybe not. We can talk about it in the Q&A if you like. But globally, what's important to notice is that nature-based solutions can provide up to 30% of the cost-effective solutions to climate change, so they can also be solutions to the biodiversity crisis. I think that's really important to notice. What are they? A lot of people might think about tree planting. Okay, tree planting draws down carbon, also creates habitat. Wonderful, yes, that counts. But also we can protect and maintain existing carbon sinks. You're going to see some cool maps of carbon sinks in a bit, which are also habitat for wildlife. There's blue carbon in the oceans. I'm not going to talk about that at all, but it's so cool. Above ground carbon, we talked about trees and plants, all this wonderful green stuff is carbon. And soil carbon, don't forget about the stuff you walk on, that's carbon too. All right, so more disaster before we get to the fun stuff. So unfortunately, if you've been following the International Panel on Climate Change, we're in a code red. Certain things are happening that are now at a stage where it's irreversible. Not everything, but some things, it's getting bad. It's not a great situation. So my colleagues on the comms team at WWF have come up with these lovely graphics. Which one do you prefer? Where would you like to be? What would you like to work towards? And if you want to learn more about that, you can visit our website right there. Moving along. We saw fires there. Obviously, fires are a part of climate change, but I just wanted to highlight this really quickly. This map this is an older IPCC assessment, but if we click next, you can see where we're at. Our biggest issues, according to this assessment, are in water. So flooding, issues around water courses. Pay attention to that. When there's water coming, we're in trouble. But you'll notice too that these are not filled in because we don't know. So the climate scientists are not sure whether it's going to be medium bad or not that bad. So this is one of the reversible things, thankfully, in our region. How about biodiversity loss? Not great. Over the entire planet, biodiversity is decreasing, species are going extinct. No change in Canada. Even though we have all of this natural expanse, our species are still suffering here as well. And you can read more about that if you like in the Living Planet Report Canada. Next, please. But we have all this protection, you would say. There are all sorts of protected areas across Canada, really big parks and stuff. Well, it turns out that another analysis by my colleagues showed that the places in Canada where there's the most biodiversity are not well protected. So here in this map, if you go back, please, so many colors. Just follow my lead with the colors. Red and orange are the most biodiverse areas. The green things are the protected areas, and they don't match up very well. So that was an interesting thing that was noticed by my colleagues, and led us to focus on certain priority regions, including the one that we're in right now. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Next, please. So biodiversity trends in all of Canada. Okay, obviously biodiversity does extend beyond this southern border. It doesn't know what borders are, in fact, but as you can see, darker green on the left is more biodiversity, and where we are right now is the most biodiverse region in all of Canada. Over here on the right, we have carbon. So I'm going to continue to talk about this, the linkage between biodiversity and climate change here. So deeper orange here is more carbon, and you can actually see, I'm just trying to point, I can't point. There are some high carbon areas in southern Ontario as well. So we can look at some areas where you can be doing work that both benefits climate change and biodiversity loss at the same time. Let's continue on. I want to talk quickly about soil carbon. This isn't really part of the discussion here, but I found this map really cool. Okay, so this dark purple thing here in the Hudson-James Bay lowland, also known as the Mushkegowuk territory, is soil carbon. Lots of it. How much of it? Next thing. Next, there we go. Over 300 petagrams. What is a petagram? Okay, let's go next. That many grams. Lots of 15 zeros grams. So what does that mean? It's 20% of the total soil carbon on the entire planet is there. Right there. That's kind of neat. Also, okay, just let's pause on this for a second. Imagine the entire carbon emissions of the whole planet Earth. Not just Canada, also the United States, also China, also all of Europe, all of Africa, all of South America in 2019. That's a lot of carbon, right? Multiply that by 25 years. That's how much carbon is there. So we gotta keep it in the ground, right? Let's not let that get into the sky, or we're gonna be in trouble. Next. There we go. Okay, so I'm focusing in a little bit here on our particular region. Again, just demonstrating the same pattern as before, that the further south you go in southern Ontario, there's more potential for, in this case, forest restoration. And I also just wanted to show wetland restoration as well. So in these maps, we're showing hexagons that have had this type of ecosystem removed. And the darker the green, the more of it has been removed. So if you happen to have a place in one of these aqua regions, think a lot about wetland restoration. And if you're anywhere in southern Ontario, forest restoration is a great idea for you. Next slide, please. Okay, more colors, more things. So here I'm talking again about this mixing of how we can co-prioritize sort of between biodiversity loss and so high biodiversity on the left is the darker blue, and the carbon in this case is deep pink. So I just wanted to show you because I think this is a super cool, colorful map. The next one combines the two of them. So in this map, and again, like try to position yourself on this map and what color are you? So if it's a bluer color, then your region is a great place to prioritize biodiversity conservation. If you're in a pinky place, then it's a great region to prioritize carbon. So plant those plants, protect the soil. And if you're in a purple region, you can do both at the same time. Very effective for both things. Okay, next slide. Here we have, this is the last map. Oh my gosh, there's so many maps. Why did I put so many maps in this presentation? The last one. This is a map that I borrowed from Carolinian, Canada. Thanks very much, Sam and colleagues. The Carolinian zone. So actually, let's just do a hands up real quick. Anybody heard of the Carolinian zone? Okay, lots. That's really great to hear. So the squiggly line here denotes the rough northern boundary of what we call the Carolinian zone. It is, as you would know by now, the most biodiverse region in all of Canada. It also has the most species at risk, and 1/3 of Canada's entire population lives in this region. Next thing. So this map shows green, healthy landscapes. A lot of those are protected areas. There's a funky one right here, which, if anyone happens to know, relates to what Sam was just talking about. That's Six Nations. So an indigenous community, very green, leading the way, showing us how to do it. Over the entire Carolinian zone, unfortunately, it's only 15% of this is green, and research has shown that in order to prevent massive biodiversity loss, we need it to be at 30% or higher. Since this region is mostly privately owned, that means we all need to chip in. We all need to do something on our individual lands. That's why I'm growing 30 species of native plants on my tiny balcony in downtown Toronto. I'm trying to do my part, folks. We can all do it. Okay, next slide, please. Oh yeah, of course. Numbers. I thought folks would be interested in numbers. So and since I'm a botanist, oh no, don't spoil it. Oh shoot, now we already know. Well, did you know that there are 1,521 different native plant species in the Carolinian zone? I think that's a lot. Raise your hand if you think that's a lot. More than you thought, or, okay, now raise your hands if that's less than you thought. Okay, actually, okay, that's interesting, that's interesting. Okay, so now we're just gonna show really quickly the breakdown. How many of those species do you think are common species? We already saw that, okay. Uncommon species. Okay, now think in your mind, how many rare? Bam, a lot. A lot of them are rare species. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're at risk, but just that there's not very many of them. They're hard to find. The next category is very interesting, historical. So these are species that used to exist pre-colonization, as far as we know, but haven't been found since then. How many of those? 88 species of native plants. What happened to them? What happened to their relationships? How are we going to get them back? Great questions. Species at risk in this area of plants, just plants. 67 different species of, so these are federally listed species, and unfortunately one of the things we know about listed species is they don't often leave this list. Once you're on the list, that's kind of the end of the road for you, unfortunately. So 67, not great. Carolinian zone restricted, that's species that you won't find outside of the Carolinian zone in Canada. How many? Lots! Special Carolinian zone plants, very cool. And then of course I just had to give a shout out to sedges. Hands up if you know what a sedge is. Cool, cool, cool. Some people, but a lot of people don't even know what a sedge is. How many species of sedges are there? 155! That's a lot. Okay, so we could Google sedges after this. Next slide, please. Individual actions. I think I've hammered this home. Like, we can do things in our own personal lives, right? No matter how big, how small your area, you can do stuff. What are you going to do? Hopefully you know this by now. Next slide, please. Apply the principles of ecology, okay? And basically I'm going to condense down everything that I've learned about ecology into 2 words. You're going to plant native plants. Okay, you've got 1,500 species to choose from. I think you'll be able to find a couple that work for you. And just stick them anywhere, literally. Keep them alive, and magical things will happen. That's what the scientific understanding of ecological restoration has to say for individuals. Can somebody give me a time check when I'm going way too long? Okay, sweet. Next. So why native plants? Again, returning to the definition up top, they've co-evolved with local wildlife over thousands of years. So that's irreplaceable. How do you get thousands of years back? You can't. Period. They're adapted to local growing conditions. So, Gora will love that one. So, you know, they know our winters, our seasons, our droughts, our floods. They're adapted to all of that, which is wonderful for gardening. We also know that if you compare side by side a native plant with a non-native plant, the native plant supports way more biodiversity. Obviously, it varies from pairing to pairing, but it's a consistent finding in science that if you want to support more biodiversity, you've got to plant native species. So, next slide. What are they though? Because there's a lot of places where you can find things labeled as a native plant, but they're not all exactly equal in certain ways. So obviously the species needs to be native to your region. That's not negotiable for it to be a native plant. But it's also important that the source is local. So many native species have a long range. They might range all the way from Ontario all the way down to Florida. If you get a plant from Florida, although it's a native species, it's not adapted to our local Ontario conditions. So it's very important that you ask and figure out where the original source of the plant was, okay? We want genetically diverse plants. I'm just gonna leave that there. That was the subject of my master's research, so I'll go on way too long if we get into that. And along those lines, we want to stay away from domesticated cultivars. Those have eroded or minimized genetic variation, and genetic variation is what's going to keep things moving and adapting and shifting to things like climate change and invasive species and diseases and whatnot. So we want genetic variation. We don't want to spray our plants with pesticides, otherwise we're killing the very species that we're trying to protect. And of course we need them to be ethically collected. So this one's also non-negotiable. Under no circumstances will anyone be going out into the wild and picking up native plants to put in their garden. Okay? Thank you. If you don't know where to find these plants, here's 2 ways you can find them. Look for our in the zone tags at Loblaw garden centers in the spring. It already happened this spring, it'll happen again next spring. Or you can go to the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association. They haven't quite launched their website yet, but they will soon. These are the very best growers of this type of native plant in all of Ontario. Some examples here. Yeah, find them, talk to them, and make some new friends. Okay, next thing. What does it look like? Here's my balcony. This is what it can look like. Little tiny container garden. Nice sweetgrass coming up in the spring. Love it. Keep going. Some more ways that it looks. I planted native plants in a boulevard garden. Got to see monarch butterflies in downtown Toronto for the first time, the year after I planted this garden. Next. Here's my brother's garden. No family member is safe from my native plant obsession. In just 2 years, we now have plants that are much, much taller than any of us and covered in bees. Okay. 1 minute. Let's just go to questions. We're going to skip this part. Ding, 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 ding. There's a thank you at the end. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We have one question from the audience. Okay, let's hear it.
All right, so the first one, are the biodiversity and carbon pink, blue, and purple hexagonal maps, are they available for just Ontario, or are they everywhere in Canada?
Yeah, so those are my colleagues from the Science, Knowledge, and Innovation team at WWF Canada. Currently, the reason they had draft all over them is those folks are trying to publish that work in a peer-reviewed journal right now. It's taking a long time. COVID affects everything, including journal publication. So they're not publicly available yet, but they will be soon. And that's true for all of Canada. And you can actually zoom all the way in to each of those little hexagons and learn specific things about your hexagon in the world. So yes, those will be available.
Second question, from the chat here. We was just asking you if you'd elaborate more on the statement that around 30% of the costs covered by natural-based solutions.
Yeah, so that's to say that if we consider all of the things that we need to do to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to the point where we're not experiencing the worst effects of climate change, if you think about all the things that we need to do and all the different portfolios of things, you could go full technology solutions like just those crazy plants that, factories that suck carbon out of the air and turn it into some mineralized thing. There's lots of different solutions that you can do, and it is possible to basically meet our climate goals according to the UN. We can meet those with 30% of that technology can basically be just restoring natural ecosystems. So tree planting, restoring wetlands, blue carbon, which again, I didn't really mention, but it's basically algae. So using all of those things to the maximum of our potential will get us 30% of the way to our goal. So we still need that other 70%, which is gonna have to be technology stuff, but nature will get us quite far, I would say, in that climate goal. Questions?
Soil carbon is going to be a big issue in agriculture in a lot of circles very soon, and it is right now. What device did you use to measure soil carbon, or how did you come up with the representation of soil carbon?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm going to do my best to answer. This is the research of my colleagues.
Sorry, I was just asked if even the questions are asked, if you could repeat the question.
Oh, of course. So the question is about how, what technology do we use to assess carbon in the soil for those maps that we saw? And the technology is a combination of satellite imagery, so it's basically the color of the Earth that inference and modeling can sort of make a guess at how much carbon is in the soil, and then that's ground truthed by people actually going out and doing an auger. And in this case, they were going 1 meter deep. So actually all of that carbon in the purple map where I showed 25 years of global carbon emissions in the Mushkegowuk territory, that's only 1 meter deep. We know that it goes way deeper than that, actually. So we need to go out there with even deeper drills and figure out all the crazy stuff that's going on in the underground. We're just doing our best. But it is a very difficult thing to measure. Any other questions? Okay, I'll leave it up to the next person now. Cheers. Thank you.
Of landowners and biodiversity. So please welcome Ian up to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see faces instead of heads. So yes, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. As Jumanah said, I am Ian Fife. I'm the Forest Birds Program Coordinator with Birds Canada, and I'm going to talk about diversity and species at risk and how landowners can work towards a bit of both, or one or the other. So a little bit outline what I'll talk about. I'll talk about the program I coordinate myself, and then I'll talk about some of the results of the surveys that we do each year. I'll also discuss an index survey that we created a few years ago to kind of evaluate landowner stewardship. And then I'll start talking about avian diversity and how landowners can work and help develop avian diversity within their woodlots. So of course, I'm being a forest bird person, I'm going to talk a lot about forests. So the Ontario Forest Birds Program monitor the population of 5 high priority species at risk in southwestern Ontario. And these are the Acadian flycatcher, the cerulean warbler, the Louisiana water thrush, the prothonotary warbler, and the red-headed woodpecker. So 4 of these birds are endangered, and only the Louisiana water thrush is threatened. All 5 of the above, just back again. It'll be the same slide. There we go. All 5 of the above at-risk forest birds can be found breeding here in the Carolinian region, southwestern Ontario, and in some cases, like the prothonotary warbler and the Acadian flycatcher, they're only found in the Carolinian region of Canada. We conduct annual surveys to monitor trends of their breeding populations. We search for and monitor the nests, and this allows the program to understand the population changes and identify where effort is required to recover these species. So occupancy, you can change these things. So occupancy surveys are our most elaborate surveys. It involves walking walking the entire woodlot, looking for habitat for 1 or more of our 5 target species. And so last year we walked over 17,000 hectares, put in 325 person effort hours, and we attempt to survey more area each and every year. As a result of our 325 person effort hours, we were able to locate 148 individuals of our target species at risk, Acadian flycatchers being the most numerous, cerulean warblers being the least numerous. The other important result of our survey reveals that private woodlots represent where our target species at risk are most abundant. And this is why I value and appreciate our relationship with the many private woodloaders we work with throughout southwestern Ontario. And so the Forest Birds Program wanted to understand private landowners better and what individuals value when it comes to their woodlots. And so in 2019, the Forest Birds at Risk Program initiated a landowner survey. The goal of the survey was to first identify stewardship values for individual landowners and determine how their stewardship values change over time. The second goal was to evaluate as a whole where organizations like Birds Canada can help educate landowners, increase their existing wood stewardship knowledge. And finally, we wanted to assess how well the program itself was at increasing stewardship knowledge among landowners. And so once we received our responses, we separated the survey respondents into those that have had bird surveys completed versus those that have not had bird surveys completed. And so we were also able to categorize our questions into 3 stewardship values, and those 3 values were conservation, forest health, and forest management. The results from our initial survey showed disparity in some stewardship values and overlap in others. Overall, respondents that have had bird surveys completed show a higher level or overall average of stewardship, indicating that land stewardship efforts are higher among those individuals that have had bird surveys completed on their properties. So the discrepancy we find in stewardship value is in the conservation land stewardship type, where respondents that have had bird surveys scored significantly higher on the stewardship scale. Questions in the survey that related to conservation were based on general wildlife habitat information, such as whether or not they included a wildlife inventory in their forest management plan, the knowledge of species at risk population and habitat protection, and general ecosystem improvements on their landscape, such as tree planting and wetland restoration. Where we find overlap is where we find common ground. All respondents had similar feelings towards forest health, and to a lesser degree, forest management. Questions on forest health related to knowledge of invasive species or development within their woodlot. One way I can use this information when approaching new potential landowners that may be a bit apprehensive to become involved with our surveys is by focusing on the importance of forest health and how forest health can contribute to avian diversity or species at risk. So before we move on with a bit more results, I'd like to provide 2 brief definitions. The first definition is avian diversity, and it's defined as a function of the number of species present and the evenness with which the individuals are dispersed among these species. The other definition is called ecological niche, and this describes a portion of habitat that a species have adapted to use in which the space they occupy provides everything they need to complete their life cycle. Additionally, ecological niches are a way for these individuals to avoid competition with other individuals of the same or different species, and that's shown here on the graphic on the right. And while this isn't an accurate graphic, it just provides an example of how individuals can maximize resources by dispersing themselves on the landscape. With these 2 concepts in mind, let's look at how we determine avian diversity and how landowners can increase diversity in their woodlots. So this table here represents a sample of the top 10 most diverse surveyed sites in 2021. Moving on to the metrics of diversity, beginning with species richness. This number refers to the total possible number of species within the surveyed areas. So for example, the top property in this table has 82 potential species of birds within their surveyed area. If we move over to species evenness, this is an index number and refers not only to the diversity of birds, but also provides insight into the ecosystem itself. Species evenness is scored from 0 to 1, and the closer to 1 these area scores, the more likely species are in equal proportions. And this also suggests that the closer the result is to 1, the more ecologically similar the habitat in the woodlot may be. And finally, we have the effective number of species, or true diversity. And it represents the number of equally abundant species, and this is the diversity metric that I use when I'm assessing woodlots. Referring back to the first site, there are about 23 equally abundant species occupying the location, which represents this site's avian diversity. Species richness and evenness don't allow us to compare sites, whereas the ENS does allow us to compare how a woodlot may be changing over time. And these 2 tables represent the top and bottom 10 sites with a change to their ENS. So over the past few years, we have averaged the ENS and compared the number with the result from the most recent year. We can see on the left, if you can hit the slide, please. Thank you. You can see on the left, the site HN27A has increased its diversity by just over 8 species. If the landowner wishes to share the history with this site, then we may be able to determine why this site had increased so much. Similarly, slide please, yeah, thank you. Observing ENS dropping by 6 species may put up some red flags for us, in which case we may want to look into this location to determine if any significant changes have occurred. We also have to consider observer error as well, as each of these sites are surveyed by different people, and there could be discrepancies between each observer, and this is why averaging ENS is much more important than over a single raw number. So the age-old question among ecologists, biologists, and even the general public is, what is more important, species at risk or diversity? I wish the answer was more black and white. It's not. If the answer was black and white, it wouldn't make my job any easier. In fact, it'd probably make it harder, but at least the answer wouldn't sound so convoluted and confusing. But the answer is, it depends. And here are a couple examples why. So species at risk, like the Acadian flycatcher, require undisturbed habitat. If you can change. They require a lot of forest canopy cover. They are an aerial insectivore like swallows, which means they feed exclusively on insects while in flight. And in order to perform these feeding flight maneuvers efficiently, they require little to no understory, typically over a treed wetland or in a steep river ravine. So actions that require human disturbance, whether it's making trails for ATVs, and especially wood harvesting from as little as firewood, removal to a full-scale harvest are detrimental to their habitat. So if I were to describe this in a more relatable way, I would say, imagine a windstorm came along, tore the roof off your house. Every contractor that comes by says they can fix the house, but it's going to take 30 years to repair it. And even after 30 years, we can't guarantee that there's going to be, there won't be any leaks. So would you stay there? Would you move out until it was fixed? Or would you move altogether? Chances are you'd likely move out altogether. The problem for the Acadian flycatcher and other sensitive species at risk is there are very few houses that have an intact roof, and any that do likely already have someone living there. And since they can't build a house with an intact roof, they're left with living somewhere with lower standards of living. On the other hand, next slide please, cerulean warblers are a bit more tolerant of disturbance. Cerulean warblers are an old-growth forest species, but males have a particular behavior where they sing from open canopy gaps that are naturally produced through tree death or produced artificially through small-scale wood harvesting or trail creation. So this type of habitat disturbance creates multiple vertical layers of forest and provides habitat for a number of different species. In conservation ecology, the cerulean warbler is considered an umbrella species. So an umbrella species is a species, a conservation concern, and it describes a particular species that when you protect their habitat, you are indirectly protecting other species' habitat. Thank you. The ecological niche of cerulean warblers allows other species, including the eastern wood pewee, to occupy similar habitat. Cerulean warbler habitat contains open canopy gaps that support eastern wood pewees, which occupy the same height in the forest, but has a completely different feeding strategy. As we move further towards the forest floor, you have the yellow-throated vireo occupying the upper mid-canopy, the American redstart occupying the lower mid-canopy, and the otherbird occupying the forest floor. However, not all cerulean habitat is created equal. Since cerulean are only concerned with the upper forest canopy, not all cerulean habitat has an open understory. In many cases, the forest floor is more shrubby, which opens up the habitat for a plethora of other species, slide please, including song sparrows, mourning warblers, indigo buntings, rose-breasted grosbeaks, just to name a few. And so how can landowners create or maintain diverse habitat for birds? The first point I'd like to mention on how landowners can increase habitat is to leave fruit-bearing trees and shrubs and mass trees. Shrub species such as elderberries, raspberries, and serviceberries serve as important fall fruiting shrubs for many bird species. Mass trees such as beech, oak, and hickories are important for nut caching, important nut caching trees. And maintaining these species are important for birds, not simply as feeding opportunities, but they can make or break a bird's ability to migrate in the fall. There is more going on the forest floor, from microbes to fungi to insects, all of which develop a well-producing and healthy, diverse forest. So maintaining the forest floor can be the key to increasing biodiversity. For birds, maintaining the forest floor is maintenance of habitat and providing ample food sources. The third point falls in the same category as the one above. Coarse woody debris and organic matter provide feeding opportunities and nesting material. Retaining standing dead trees not only provides nesting and roosting opportunities, but also not only for birds, but for mammals such as flying squirrels, bats, and fishers. And most importantly, create and maintain a vertical and/or horizontal structure in the woodlot. This can be, next slide please. This can be achieved through a selection harvest system. A light harvest creates vertical structural diversity. A heavier selection harvest, like single tree selection harvest, would produce similar results to the light harvest, just over a much larger area. So by taking some trees for firewood and creating canopy gaps, that allows light to reach to the forest floor, encourage regeneration of suppressed saplings, and this includes many mass trees such as oak and maple. Next slide, thank you. A group selection harvest would initially create a horizontal structure of diversity in the woodlot, followed years later by vertical structure. Riparian areas also offer a brilliant opportunity to create horizontal structure, especially riparian areas around municipal drains. I heartily encourage landowners to develop a natural buffer around riparian areas that will reduce water evaporation, stabilize the stream bank from erosion, and create habitat for many insects, birds, and possibly even fish. Thank you. To sum everything up regarding species at risk and diversity, the answer isn't so clear-cut. Diversity should always be the target for anything we are working on. Maintaining diversity means maintaining strength and resilience. It doesn't matter if a woodlot is used for nature or economics, diversity is always proved to be the best way to maintain a healthy ecosystem. That said, some species at risk represent diversity, as I showed with the cerulean warbler. And finally, species at risk that are susceptible to disturbance should take priority over avian diversity. The extinction of a species, whether that's locally or globally, means a loss of diversity. This is why it's so important to have organizations like Birds Canada to conduct surveys before activities take place. This suggestion is not to instruct how to manage your woodlot, but work with landowners and forest managers to offer solutions to achieve landowners' economic and conservation goals while maintaining species at risk and diverse habitats. The point is, all objectives can be achieved. There is no reason why species at risk and diversity can't be protected in light of human activity. Next slide. Thank you all for your time. Thank you to ALUS Middlesex at Elgin for putting this conference together and giving us the opportunity to speak. We also thank all the organizations that have allowed us to conduct surveys throughout southwestern Ontario, especially the 100+ private woodlot owners that use their data to create and develop a sustainable forest management plan that protects bird habitat and improves forest health through biodiversity. I'd be happy to take any questions. Yes, in the back there, please. Any thoughts on
Yeah, I think that's something that's important, not just in this area, I guess in the area that I'm in, Norfolk County, where, tree cover is a little bit more present. We're over 30% in Norfolk County. Where we are lacking with that cover is connectivity between those woodlots. And so that's where a lot of work is, and we're trying to build up the connectivity between those woodlots through hedgerows, through hedgerows mainly, and just other tree planting initiatives. I think as we move further southwest and more towards the Windsor area, I think forest cover is is where we need the keys to increase just forest cover in general. I think that should be the priority down this way, and then we can work on connectivity through hedgerows, etc. in that sense later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian, for highlighting and showcasing the importance of landowner getting landowners involved in programs and environmental organizations. And to continue on that train, we're hoping to have Drake Larsen join us to discuss his involvement in the ALUS Elgin program. So let's welcome Drake.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. She didn't tell me until just now that I was supposed to discuss my participation, so I got absolutely no rules. So I hope that this fits in. It's all good. But I hope I hit the mark. So biodiversity in agriculture. That's what I took from the title, Growing Biodiversity. And I was asked to speak this because I run a small farm near here, Three Ridges Ecological Farm, where we try to put a lot of our focus onto raising biodiversity and testing out some of these practices and trying to learn how we can bring biodiversity into our active working landscapes. So just a little bit of a roadmap here. First, I'm going to give a framework for thinking about biodiversity on agricultural landscapes. I want to touch on water because it's so important for agriculture, and biodiversity is such a good opportunity to talk about that. And then I'll touch on our farming. So first, this framework for thought. I'm very quickly going to compromise potentially my thin veneer as a farmer and admit that I was an academic for a while. And about 10 years ago, when I was working at Iowa State University, I was approached, and some colleagues, my advisor in my master's, and myself as a student, another student, we wrote a book chapter for the Encyclopedia of Biodiversity on biofuels and biodiversity. And so the number one lesson that you learn in academics is if you have to make a presentation, you use materials from presentations that you've given previously. So, first 2 slides done. So, but a framework for how we can think about this, and this, I made this figure in the context of biofuels, but it can pins it down here. We can pin it down. 2 of the main axes and ways that we can think about biodiversity in agriculture is the amount of plant diversity that you have in the ground, which is, I can't read in the back, and then the level of inputs. So that center axis is high input on the top and low inputs on the bottom. And what we find is, on your far left, that would be sort of a representation of the biodiversity that we could expect from a natural ecosystem. And then we see our agroecosystems going on the right, with the lowest biodiversity being found where there's high inputs and low crop diversity, followed by with low inputs and low diversity, then high inputs, high diversity, and then high diversity with not very many inputs. And we start to get back to our higher levels of biodiversity. And so I just want to touch on this idea of inputs, because I think as farmers, especially in our conventional cropping landscapes, there's some things that we can really quickly do to give biodiversity an edge. And so I want to tease apart why those systems were so different. And I apologize if this is too small in the back. But to think about the systems with the lowest biodiversity, we have these high input, low diversity systems. It doesn't take a scientist to think about why there's less biodiversity in a cornfield than there is in a native prairie or savanna or forest. These ecosystems, agroecosystems, are highly simplified. They're basically in a disturbed state, and so they're the furthest from nature. These kind of ecosystems tend to promote generalists, and so we just heard about bird diversity, and then what do we see in our corn and wheat fields? Like lots of Canada geese. They're awesome. Canada goose is like my spirit bird, so props to them, but also they're very generalists. That's representative of what all of the biodiversity associated with these ecosystems are. Our soil, microbial communities are highly generalized. We've lost a lot of the biodiversity when we're having these high input, low diversity systems. So to think about this idea of inputs, we can compare that to these low input, low diversity systems, which on the slide with respect to biofuels is something like a poplar plantation, but it could be anything. It could be, soon on the horizon is a perennial wheat, which I think is going to be a great staple food crop for us, but it's still going to be this low diversity system of a monoculture. And really, when you look at the science and you tease it down, what we find is when you add less nitrogen fertilizer to your fields, you have less weed pressure, less pest pressure, less parasite pressure. With those lesser pressures, you have the opportunity to use less herbicides and pesticides, and that immediately brings us more biodiversity. An example from around here and from my native Iowa is something as simple as when glyphosate came in, we lost most of the foxtail, and with the foxtail was a very important weed species. We lost quail and all sorts of grassland birds that were making a living on our corn and bean landscapes. But when we lost foxtail, we lost a lot of those bird species. And so I want you to think, when we think about these gradients from high diversity to, or from high input to low input, I'm not suggesting we need to give up inputs, but even if we move our needle from high input use to just very judicious input use, or other parts of the rotation where we can lower our inputs, we can very immediately see reactions with greater biodiversity. So that's a very easy leverage point for biodiversity. Then I want to talk about bringing plant diversity back onto our farms. Simply put, like the greater plant, different crop diversity that we have on our farms, the more wildlife biodiversity we're going to have. When this is crop diversity that's in our fields, we're also going to have soil biodiversity. And who really knows what is the chicken and the egg in these situations? But I think if we're fostering plant diversity, we're fostering soil diversity, all of biodiversity is going to be raised up by that. Whether it's led by the soil or by the plants, it probably doesn't matter. As farmers, our easiest levers are the plants, because those are the ones that we play with and choose. When we have greater complexity in our plant diversity, we facilitate biodiversity. We just heard in the last presentation about horizontal and vertical structure. So that's not only true in trees, but we can bring these pieces into our ag landscapes and very quickly just create more niche space for biodiversity. And then with respect to agri-ecosystems, they're so neat because we get to play with them more than we do any other ecosystem. So in a lot of the talks so far, we've been talking about sort of restoration of natural ecosystems, and ALUS does that in large part too. But more of what I think that they do and what I do is use these there's tools in the toolbox, and these native ecosystems are part of our tools, but we can apply these in the landscape in different ways. So even a highly monoculture driven farm growing your corn and your beans and wheat, they can add diversity both in time and space on their farm. They can add diversity through their rotations over time. They can add diversity just in small pieces on their farm. And then you can achieve diversity through mosaics of plants. So even something as simple as alternating swaths of corn and beans next to each other has higher biodiversity value than a big cornfield next to a big bean field. And so we think back to those systems as the general models for how to think about agriculture biodiversity. And if we want to think about high input and high diversity systems, we'll remember that's like the third highest amount of biodiversity from our systems. Then we get into more complicated systems like strip cropping, intercropping, relay cropping, cover crops. We can talk about all these things that some are more or less impactful, but in a highly diverse cropping rotation may be more impactful than sort of corn with a rye cover crop, for instance. So there's variation in there, but we can see about how to add these things in. Having mixed annual and perennial mosaics on the farm. We heard about forest restoration today, and I'm going to continue to encourage us to bring the forests back into our farm. And then by adding conservation features, a lot of these things that ALUS does, even from the simplest grass waterways, and then into sort of more diverse pollinator habitats and those sorts of things. These conservation features can really bring diversity back onto our farm, even in the high input context. And we know that's the third highest biodiversity, so you can still have high inputs and have a lot of diversity. And then low input, high diversity systems, like from the natural standpoint, we're thinking of grasslands and forests. This is the sort of system that I want to run on my farm. I call my farm an ecological farm, in part because I'm trying to close these loops such that I don't need inputs. And right now, inputs are a big topic in international, global, Canadian agriculture, both from the fact that there's some politicization of inputs. Inputs are really freaking expensive, and there's different market levels there where the system uses inputs to really pinch farmers. And so if we don't have to use inputs, it's harder for them to pinch us. And really all these things, lower inputs, higher diversity. Skipped a little ahead too fast there. Oh, can you go back to? Just, this is synergy. That's what brings us our biodiversity. So that sort of concludes my hopefully academic portion of the talk. But I hope it's a good framework. The second part I want to touch on is water is life. And if we're talking about biodiversity, and I've given this platform, I absolutely have to bring this up. You know, for a long time, I just had water is life written in black and white on my board, but I decided to use my wife's favorite artist, it's Christy Belcourt, a Métis Canadian artist, and she has some free online protest posters, and this one just speaks so powerful to me because it is, and we need to protect the water. And I think if we can switch our management to thinking about water, we can solve a lot of the other problems. And so, just to get this idea of water through, now maybe I want to talk about these two graphics that a friend of mine, Zach Weiss, has made, and I'm going to talk about the watershed death spiral and the watershed regeneration spiral. And I think when we can fix these, when we can fix the hydrology on our landscape, we can fix everything else. As much as I appreciate the sort of carbon conversation, this right here, folks, is climate change. This is why our climate's changing. We've messed up the hydrology. We've cleared the land. This picture says everything we need to know to talk about climate change. There's not one factory. There's not one airplane. Not one car is on a road. It's landscape change. It's how we've driven these things. All these other pieces are a part of the puzzle. We need to sink carbon. Our landscapes are also the answer to sinking the carbon. And so just quickly, we could talk about these forever. You know, we have cleared landscapes. It's causing increased temperatures in general. We have fluctuating rainfalls. Some areas on this depiction have no rainfall. Some areas are having heavy rainfalls. And we know all the things that come with this: erosion, degradation of our agricultural landscapes, degradation of deep water. There's lots of wells in this picture. It's a powerful tool for agriculture, and it, you know, we know that's like the lifeblood around here for some ag systems, especially when you get into Norfolk. Bless you folks, I don't even know how you grow crops on that sand, but irrigation is a big part of that, and I think it's being used judiciously here. But when we think about contexts like the Ogallala Aquifer in Nebraska and Kansas, like we are cruising for a bruising in that segment. I mean, that's the breadbasket of North America in many ways, as much as our prairies are here too. But we've drained this lifeblood of the earth, and our ecosystems are in a death spiral. This is biodiversity, this is climate change, all of it. And the neat thing about being a farmer in this room is the farmers can change it all. Other people play a role, of course, as well as, not to just mention eaters. But the revived water cycle, like right, this is an ALUS right here, right? Alternative ranching, grazing, we're going to talk about that. Taking the areas that we're problematic for, putting in water, putting in wetlands, healing these water cycles. More clean water is making it to our systems. The whole system is cooled. It's all these components that we think about in carbon sequestration. But really, if we heal the water, it will be done for us, and we don't have to tax things and market things and count things. Oh, I keep just barely touching that. I'm gonna put it down. I should have said at the beginning of the thought about water and climate change. Carbon is about 10% of the climate change equation, but we use carbon because carbon is easy to model, it's easy to count. You can measure it in the air, you can measure it in the water, you can measure turnovers, there's different pools, it's really fun to model. Water is really hard to model. It comes in 3, now maybe they say 4 phases. There's latent fissions involved when it's changing phases, so it's really complicated. Water has gotten the short shaft because carbon is easy to model. And if we want to heal our ecosystems, and if we want to promote biodiversity, we need to revive our water cycle. And in North American context, farmers are the ones that can do that. So we talk about how we farm for biodiversity. Now this starts to bring it a little back into my current expertise, so to speak, although really I just move fence and move waters, and the animals do all the farming. So the big umbrella that I can talk about in my farm is silvopasture. So I'm grazing animals amongst trees. I think that's just a small part of the bigger picture of agroforestry that we could talk about for this area. I want to talk about designing our farm landscapes for water, and then I want to touch on the 80-20 principle, which I think is a great thing that farmers and managers and we can use at ALUS for planning biodiversity. So silvopasture, it's been mentioned, so we're all knowledgeable now. This is the Carolinian ecoregion. Forest was here. Trees should be part of our agriculture, and not just the edge of our agriculture. Trees should be a productive part of our agriculture. I choose to use the trees mostly to support grazing systems. We'll hear from Bryan later. He's a mentor of mine, and I've seen the way he uses trees as an integral part of his grazing system. Trees can be used many ways. Can be for shade, can be for winter protection, can be for fodder production. But we have these. On my farm, I'm making meat, which is one of the main things that society wants out of agriculture, and I do it with trees and pastures in between. Very important tool, mimicking sort of the savanna ecosystems that actually would have been like between grassland and forest, we have savanna, and really on long time scales, we were swaying back and forth between these two geologically, depending on what rain paradigms were like, fire disturbance, things like glaciers. And then agroforestry is a more general term that has many forms. I would say that it's only limited by what our imagination is. You know, trees can be used for all the things that we use agriculture for. Nut crops can produce our starches and our proteins and our oils, the same as we're getting from corn and beans. A chestnut tree at maturity will grow 4,000 pounds of chestnuts in a year. So these systems can compete with what we think about our monoculture cropping systems and our annual cropping systems. And so we have these perennial systems that take low inputs. They could be grow everything, orchards, textiles, woods. We haven't even got into more dynamic situations like we could be using trees and different systems to actually create soil. I mean that in the sense of like terra preta societies that have built soil before by using forest systems. So second, I want to talk about on the farm how we can design for water. I've included just a little conceptual map of my farm. That's not how it looks like yet. I tell people when I get to that point, that's probably when I'm done. And so got about 35 years left to complete it, I hope. But really, we want to design for water on our farms. We want to think about three principal things: slow it, spread it, and sink it. But that sort of ends up being like the woo-woo permaculture way. And sometimes the way I want to talk to farmers about it is it just blue before black. And that black is your checkbook. Take care of your water. That is your productivity. It will pay off. How do we do it? I searched for the right word for a long time as I was making this presentation. I chose with act on contour. The easiest thing that any farmer can do is just do things on contour. Whether it's me, my fencing patterns, if I can put them on contour. If you're tilling, if you can plow on contour. If you can use your entryways on contour. I'll tell a little bit of story from this. I don't know if you can see contour lines on here, but just assume that sort of every land feature, hedgerow, terrace, swale is on contour, and we're thinking about the way the water moves across the landscape. This is my driveway that was built before I'm here. This starts to go straight up a hill. Guess what happened to my driveway yesterday? It washed out a lot, right? Every time. I do a lot of work to try to upkeep it, but it's in the wrong place. It goes straight uphill. Why are we driving straight uphill? This is a terrace that I built 2 years ago. I use it for ATV and tractor travel now. But it comes in on the low spot. It's a 1% grade. My daughter, through the grass, can ride her bike up it anytime, even the grass is tall, because I get to the same place by following the contour slowly, just a few degrees. I can use that water. I've got a pond here. I dump my pond into my terrace, and the water sub-irrigates trees all along that path. And that should be my driveway. It would function better if that was my gravel driveway. But I already spent $14,000 repairing the gravel where they put it in the wrong spot, so I couldn't afford to put a terrace in. So I just put a $3,000 terrace that I could drive my tractor on. But if we plan these things, but what farmer is going to put their laneway in the middle of their field? They don't, because it seems goofy and the neighbor's going to laugh and it doesn't feel right. But if you planned every bit of machinery travel off of that pattern, set on this terrace, everything would be better. Talk about habitat connectivity. If we planned these on the contour, all of our habitats would be connected. There'd be less fuel use. Joe knows you gotta go higher RPMs when you're driving up that hill, especially if it's muddy and you're turning. If we planned it all on contour, the same thing we're doing, just in a little bit different pattern. We could facilitate biodiversity, and our farms would closed water cycles and all those things. I forget what the last thing was there. We could talk about that map forever too. As you can see the rest of that, I want to hold a lot of water on my farm. You know, people ask me after a day like yesterday, how much rain did you get yesterday? All of it. I keep it all. That's the goal. We were suffering a month ago because we didn't have water. But we have these systems where we drain them in the spring, and then we complain about them in July, and then we praise the gods in August, and sometimes it works out, and then we have water again. But we gave it all away before. So then the 80-20 areas. I'm sure we've heard about this principle. Do I still have just like a couple more minutes? We can do a lot in a little bit of space, have a little action to bring a lot of impact. This 80-20 idea comes from a mathematical thing called the Pareto principle. And when I looked up last night to make sure I was spelling it, I noticed it's sort of in the long roots, like back into Greek words and stuff. It actually comes from the vital few, the Pareto principle. Pareto's the guy, but the way they used to talk about it in like Socrates' days is the vital few. And I think that makes so much sense for a talk about biodiversity. We have these vital few areas. We can support a lot of biodiversity. According to this principle, 20% of the area we can support 80% of the biodiversity. It varies, but the principle holds. And so as for some concrete example, that's concrete. I built a snake hibernacula on my place on the high ridge where probably without 15 to 20 years of soil remediation, I was never going to produce anything anyhow. But I dug a hole like 30 feet by 30 feet by 15 feet deep, filled it full of concrete and tubing, and now I have a snake hibernacula that supports biodiversity on my farm. I put fabric back over the top of it after this, filled it with another couple feet of dirt, seeded it back down. I still graze on top of it. I probably get a little less, but actually maybe even a little more biomass because of what's sort of happening with the biology in that hibernacula. And it literally, I still graze over the top of it. And I grow mostly sheep now, and they love it because there's stuff to stand on and all that sort of stuff. So another thing we can do, a farmer gave me this terminology a while back, the Nick Point Pond. And Chris and I were just talking about this a few weeks ago. It's a big problem. ALUS spends a lot of money on areas of the forest edge where we're trying to keep runoff from ag fields from eroding in the forest gully. And so we put things like this in. Everybody puts things like this in, right? That's the thing to do. We're doing the erosion work is to put a Hickenbottom drain in there and then a whole long thing of tile down the bottom so that we take away that erosivity power of the water as it gets to the bottom of the creek. And we've done the job to save the erosion in the field. Absolutely we have. But the water still goes to Lake Erie just as fast, maybe even faster than before we had that. So all these other inflection points where we can talk about rehydrating and regenerating this water cycle, we've lost those options because all we've done is done another tile line. My goodness, there's so much tile around, and it's I think it's my mortal enemy. This up here is a slightly more sophisticated water use practice called the WAS cob, and it's essentially like a water and sediment concentration basin. So we put those in the farm fields, and it's great. It does what it's supposed to do. It actually does stretch out that hydrograph by holding the water on the land for even 24, 48 hours more. But then it goes back down. The picture on the far left, that's my Nick Point in my backyard, where I spent basically the same amount of money as this. And I just put the pipe higher up in the air. So now I have 6 feet of water. All these, I tried to find pictures. My pond looks a lot better now. It's a little pond. It hardly qualifies. It's like for me to you guys in the front there. But for the same amount of money, if we're just going to look at that, which one do we think is going to have the most biodiversity potential? Right there, I've got like 20,000 gallons or more of water. I can't even sleep with the frogs at night. Like I just lay and listen to them. They're right outside my house. That opportunity exists in each of those pictures. And I'm not saying everybody's going to do it. I've taken land out of production, and it did cost me more money, and I have to fight weeds around it as in establishment years and all these things. But since we're here to talk about biodiversity, that's what we can do. And then scaling up that Pareto principle to sort of bring this back home to ALUS. I just clipped this out of YouTube, and as a way to save me the typing of the words. And we should look for this. I didn't even know this was going on in this capacity, but through ALUS Norfolk, there's this I'm Webb's modeling software. Professor Yang in the back so glad he's here. He gave ALUS Elgin and ALUS Norfolk a great presentation maybe a month ago on this tool. But we can use this 80-20 rule to target our conservation efforts through all of our ALUS dollars and our farmer volunteer hours and everything that makes this happen, using this integrated modeling tool with for watershed evaluation of management practices. And we can use the 80-20 rule to put these practices on the ground. This is more about sort of water quality and quantity, but from that, I've told you, if we heal the water system, we're going to heal all the biodiversity anyhow. We could also start to use this tool to plan things like we've heard mentioned today, corridors, these edge effects, repairing buffers, and that sort of thing. And so, from the farm scale, you know, you've got your 3 meter by 2 meter prairie plant on your balcony. We're fostering it. I've got my snake hibernacula. I've got my whole farm, which gives me my 50-acre template, and then we can come into big watershed and use regional areas to promote biodiversity through targeted conservation, the way that ALUS does every day. And that's that. It's my lovely wife, Sarah. We run our farm, Three Ridges Ecological Farm. It's about 10-15 minutes away. And if you have any questions, you can email me, or I look forward to the panel discussion later on. I don't know if I went too long.
I actually have 2 questions from chat. So the first one, do you feel the principles and approaches you exemplified align with regenerative agriculture? And that's currently the direction they're looking for, where this speaker works in Surrey, BC, and what the province is starting to provide funding for.
Yeah, I think that's a great umbrella term for it, certainly. You know, I think we don't want to get too caught up in terms. When I was in school, it was sustainable agriculture. Now it's regenerative agriculture. And then I think, you know, a lot of those things can tend to get washed down. I consider mine to be regenerative agriculture, and I'll just describe my farm to be regenerative agriculture, or on its way. But I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you why I think that's different than sometimes sustainable agriculture, which is just, which is great, but also just has different sets of goals. My place is regenerative agriculture in large part because I've planted so many chestnut and hazelnut and oak trees around, and I consider it regenerative because if I don't make it home tonight and that farm's not touched again, those trees are going to grow and seed and grow again. So I figure all the trees I planted, which many of them die, and trees end up being very expensive to keep them alive to maturity. They're the regenerative part. It's not about the fact that I'm just building soil through a crop rotation of cover crops, because if all of a sudden your field stops getting farmed when it's a buckwheat cover crop, that's fine, but it's not regenerative because it's just going to be fallow and need constant human input, which is great in order to keep that going. My plan is, and especially if I can, you know, sort of finish the long arc of that management plan that I showed you, it's true regeneration. If we stop farming it, it's still going to produce food. We can go away for 100 years, and somebody's going to come back and say, thanks for the apples. Like, it's awesome. There's going to be stuff going. That's regenerative agriculture. Perpetual, I consider it on my farm, and I'm just getting through this first stage of just kickstarting the ecological flywheel. And then regenerative agriculture is when that ecological flywheel is spinning so fast that it doesn't matter what, I can't even mess it up. Then it's regenerative.
I have a second question from the same person. Pamela is the asker. The second question is, what sort of supports do you feel the provinces and municipal governments can provide to help farmers get to the place where you are at? Since it can be a real challenge for operators to transition, especially farmers that have been using conventional, large-scale industrial approaches.
Jeez, now they're going to try to get me in trouble. Yeah, I mean, ALUS here is great, right? We're leveraging public and private funds, partnerships, so that the market can support farmers to do these things. I think that's very important. We have a lot of flexibility and resiliency because of that. We actually get to tap into farmer innovation, which is such an underutilized resource in this fight for biodiversity and fight for climate change, farmer innovation. But one of the biggest things, and I won't go into it too much. It's just like, get out of the way. Like my farm plan, if I was to show you this whole thing, has room for like 18 to 24 ponds, all dedicated to just like recharging Mother Earth with the lifeblood of water, and 15 of them are illegal for me to build. So, you know, I know we have these rules because sometimes people have done things wrong in the past, but it's a lot of red tape in Canada. I'm a libertarian American, and sometimes it's a lot of red tape. It's not easy everywhere, and there's red tape everywhere, but unlock farmer innovation. We can do it.
Thank you very much, Drake. Whenever we have these type of conferences, I always invite him because he's just so passionate about his message. So we really appreciate that. Next up, we actually have myself and Peter from ALUS Middlesex presenting our next talk. Oh, okay. So, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. This presentation is focused on the program coordinator's perspective on growing biodiversity. So you'll be hearing about the work that we do in ALUS Middlesex and ALUS Elgin. And this is actually a pretty picture taken from a participant who's actually here today. So thank you, Rudy and Diane, for your lovely wetland photo. Moving on to the next slide. To begin, we wanted to start by giving some spatial awareness of where Elgin and Middlesex counties actually are. So we're just going to zoom in. We just skipped it. And if I figured out how to do this on Google Earth, and it's amazing. It works now, which it's not. Anyway, okay, awesome, yes. Are you guys impressed? Okay, thank you. So Middlesex and Elgin County are located on the north shores of Lake Erie. It is located in the Carolinian biozone, which you've heard a lot about so far. And you can see the squiggly line here in the middle. That's actually the delineation of the Thames River, which separates Elgin and Middlesex counties. Peter's going to dive into more of the natural features of the area that we work in.
We certainly are home to some amazing natural features here, and they help connect us and identify us as a community. Starting off with the Carolinian zone, it's only 8% of the landmass in Ontario, but is home to a third of the species at risk found in all of Canada. Its lush forests, grasslands, and wetlands are hubs for biodiversity and are home to species found nowhere else in Canada. The Deshkan Zibi, or the Thames River, is a significant natural heritage feature of the region. 270 kilometers long, it is a natural corridor for both humans and wildlife alike. Meandering its way between Elgin and Middlesex counties, it is home to over 150 different aquatic species and is the highest diversity of fish fauna in Ontario. And then where a lot of our water ends up, Lake Erie. Recognizable from space, it was named after the Erie people, an indigenous nation who lived on the south shore. It's the most productive lake of the Great Lakes, has towering bluffs, 30 plus islands, sand spits, and its shoreline is world-renowned for providing migratory birds.
So it is evident that there is a lot of biodiversity inherent and natural to the area that we work in. But unfortunately, as we've discussed a few times already today, we are experiencing a biodiversity decline. So beginning with colonization and land use change, over an extensive period of time, we're seeing large amounts of habitat being broken up into smaller bits, which is labeled as or defined as fragmentation. This fragmentation is directly related to habitat loss. So when you're removing that natural cover, those trees, we're losing a lot of vital habitat for forest-dwelling species. And with that removal of natural cover, as Rick mentioned, you'll notice a lot of overlap in the conversations that we're having because everything is so interconnected. So that natural cover that's being removed is encouraging a lot of erosion that we're seeing, especially with the establishment of a lot of impermeable surfaces in our cities and our towns. And this flash movement of water is eating away at our soil and putting that directly into our local waterways. So we're seeing a lot of sediment loading with that increased erosion and increased flooding with those flash floods and movement of water. And all of these factors put on so much pressure on the existing species that we have here, because they affect not only the availability of habitat or lack thereof, but also the quality of habitat that we do have, and the water quality and air quality that we all experience. So all these pressures put on the species here are increasing the amount of species that are at risk of being threatened and or extinct in southwestern Ontario. Which is extremely depressing. I depress all the time about it. So let's move on to some opportunity. Opportunity with restoration, or through restoration with ALUS. So ALUS, you've heard the name kind of mentioned a few times. It is the original acronym for Alternative Land Use Services. The program works with farmers and landowners to restore marginal or unproductive farmland to naturalized habitats. It's a program that is based on many principles, some of which are noted here on the screen. So it's community developed, which means that it's very unique and specific to the counties or the areas that they are delivered out of. This means that the approaches do change from which the program is delivered, meaning that they're very unique, of course, to the areas, but hopefully our goal is to be very suitable with our approach. The program is also farmer delivered, which means that we do involve and work directly with landowners to do the projects that we implement on ground, and that is, of course, to have their investment, the landowners have the most information about their properties that they work on, and to ensure longevity of the projects and maintenance of projects, we hope to get them involved. And a lot of times they actually do reach out to us because they're so interested in stewardship, so that's always great to see. Our program is also accountable, which means we get a third-party organization to come and verify our projects to ensure that yes, they are existing, but also that they are being maintained. And this, of course, like I mentioned, allows for the longevity of our project, which is a major goal of the ALUS program, is to ensure that we are restoring habitat, but this habitat is staying in the ground. And our projects are science-based. So our approach is ensuring that we do get external input from our partners and scientific information so that we ensure the suitability and reliability of the project choices that we put into the ground. And moving into specific project types that we do with ALUS, we do a lot of tree plantings, which we found is very appropriate for the southwestern Ontario portion that we're working out of to promote biodiversity. So through tree plantings, we put in shelter belts or windbreaks, but also larger block plantings to provide habitat for wildlife. And they also, of course, filter our air quality and sink carbon or hold on to that carbon in the air. We also implement wetland projects as well. So wetlands, if you can think of trees as like the lungs of our environment. So they filter our air. Our wetlands are kind of the kidneys, which is kind of gross sounding, but they do filter water, which is very important. They act almost as sponges and are one of the most biodiverse habitats, if not the most biodiverse habitat in southwestern Ontario. So the wetlands hold water and they allow for the sedimentation process to take place. So it slows water, holds it, and allows all the sediment to settle to the bottom and reduce the amount of excess nutrients and other content that is flowing right off of our fields and off of our properties into the water. So it holds onto that to allow that to settle so that our waterways remain clear or cleaner. Unfortunately, I don't have an organ to associate with grasslands, but grasslands are very special. They have large root systems that hold onto the soil, so you'll see them in conjunction with a lot of erosion control work that we do. And they are critical habitat for a lot of grassland bird species as well as pollinators. Moving on to erosion control, like I mentioned, we do have more naturalized versions of erosion control, so grassland plantings and wetlands as well. But we also involve infrastructure. You did see those little orange plastic tubes in Drake's presentation. That's a Hickenbottom, so we use that in conjunction with a lot of naturalized plantings as well so that we can address in-field erosion. and then modified agriculture, which are modified operations on farm fields to ensure the availability of crucial habitat. So in southwestern Ontario, we have a lot of people involved in delayed haying projects, which means they delay their first cut of hay to allow for the fledging of grassland bird species.
These project types all offer really great nature-based solutions to local problems. And we're happy to say that we're working with 178 farmers in Elgin and Middlesex counties. We look in to be a part of this process, from planning a project to seeing it established. Working 1 acre at a time, we're excited to have 1,000+ acres in our programs, adding to the natural landscape. We want to take a little bit of time now to take you to one of these projects and look at the design and function of it. This is a restoration project that follows the path of Mud Creek. And as you can see from this picture, Mud Creek divides these two farm fields, with agricultural practices taking place on both sides of the creek. Previously, as you can see in this picture, the riparian area of these lands was farmed. And when we were approached by the farmer about this project, he expressed concerns of erosion, so erosion along the shoreline of the creek and losing farmland, as well as he wanted to see a return of native species and wildlife to the area. We designed this project with the needs of the landscape in mind and worked with the farmer and the Oswego Bayfield Conservation Authority to retire and restore this area, establishing a riparian buffer area between sensitive waters and agriculture. This was a 3-year-long project and resulted in a 1.2-kilometer-long habitat corridor, helping to connect the landscape, renaturalize a significant portion of Mud Creek. Close to 5,000 native trees and shrubs were planted along this area. Where monocrops were grown before is now a functioning ecosystem that has seen deer, coyotes, red-tailed hawks, and other wildlife using it to travel across the landscape. In addition to creating new habitat, this project also helps to improve the existing habitat. The native vegetation and its root systems stabilize the banks and help to reduce erosion. The buffer areas will keep a sediment nutrient out of the creek from the agricultural practices, and the trees will provide shade and keep the river cool, which is an important feature that many aquatic species at risk need. Although this project was just recently completed, we are already starting to see the positive impacts and linkage on the landscape. This is just one example of how we can come together to do some good and grow biodiversity.
And Peter brings up a really good point about our approach to growing biodiversity, and that is to not only build habitat to safeguard wildlife, but to also allow for safe passage, which are two factors that we hope to implement in most of our projects, create that connectivity again, reduce that fragmentation is the word, I don't want to mess up that word again, and to encourage and support the biodiversity in the area. So we thought we wanted to showcase a lot of the biodiversity that we are seeing on the land. So we have a few photos to share. These are all taken of projects on our sites, our ALUS sites, that are either we've taken ourselves or participants have shared with us. So we'll just flip through those, and you get a good idea of wildlife that we do see. And as the old saying goes, if you build it, they will come, and they really sure do. So through the establishment of grasslands and wetlands, and tree planting, of course, we see a lot of biodiversity returning to local farms, local farmlands, and reintroducing naturalized and native habitat and vegetation, of course, will, of course, support that native wildlife that we do see. So yes, that is the last part of our presentation. If you have any questions on the chat or in the room here, we can answer them. Sorry, there's a fly. All right, so our next speaker that we're very happy to have, our keynote speaker for the afternoon, is Bryan Gilvesy, the CEO of ALUS Canada. So without further ado, let's welcome Bryan to the podium.
Thank you, everyone. It's my decided pleasure to be here. These facilities that are popping up all over Southern Ontario and Alberta and Manitoba, they're wonderful. And I'm glad that we can harness a place like this for these events, which are so important and critical to what we do at ALUS with our community-based nature. I am decidedly not an academic like Drake, with all his brilliance. He's supposed to put one concept in a speech, not the whole shebang. My head's still spinning. I only wish I was connected as Sam. I only dream of being that connected. I try hard though, but I don't think I'll ever get there. And the last thing I want to say is I am the OG here. I'm the last original guy from ALUS. I'm the oldest one now. And Preston is like a few days in. It's fabulous, the juxtaposition here today. So this is great. Okay, so I wanted to introduce you or reintroduce you to our new tagline, mission statement, and vision statement, because it helps us in tone what I want to talk about here today. So where agriculture and nature meet is new. The communications team decided this is way better than what I had in mind. So this is where we are. It's good. Our vision statement is, I have always loved our vision statement because it says agriculture, wildlife, and natural spaces. It speaks to balance, right? The balance between agriculture and natural spaces, which really speaks to us here in rural Canada, right? Next, what I love about that statement is that the benefits that we provide by doing this accrue to communities, outside communities, to Canadians. That there's something emanating from us to them, which is really, really cool and helps cement what we do at ALUS. The mission statement I like because it brings into the concept that we're working with farmers and ranchers, but I like the fact that we focus in on biodiversity. You're going to hear me say this again and again. If you know me very long, I consider, despite Dr. Yang's brilliant work on water, for me, biodiversity is the peak indicator of our immediate success in ALUS, and I'll try and explain to you why. But that to me is evidence that we got things right. But I'll try and expand upon that a little bit. Next. This is central to why I care about ALUS, and I think why we all care about ALUS, and that is we understand, we're comfortable in our own skin, we understand the role that we play. There's lots of conservation groups, brilliant conservation groups that do protection. Our role is kind of different. We do production, and that fits a farmer's eye. We put back more. We're the people that can help restore Canada's natural capital, right? It's kind of neat to be that absolutely clear-eyed on what our role is, because we're not trying to be everything to everybody, right? These farmers, these ranches, these communities solving this problem in settled Canada where most of us live, work, and play. Next, some numbers. 5. Middlesex County ALUS, or Middlesex ALUS, 5 years old, right? Steve? Today? Not today. Elgin? 10. Where's the time gone? Where has the time gone, my Lord? 17. That's how long I've been at it. The reason I put my number up is because I wanted to make this conversation a little bit personal. I didn't want to speak to you as the CEO of ALUS. I want to speak to you as somebody who's been engaged, influenced, and energized by this program. And maybe you'll find something in common with my experience. ALUS has secret sauce. Rob Olson used to say in the West, you say ALUS has magic. Whatever you want to call it, there's something magical going on here, whether the secret sauce or not. And it's this old document written in 2004 called ALUS, A Farmer's Conservation Plan. This is written by Bob Bailey and the great Dave Reed from Norfolk County back in 2004. And it laid out the conditions of what our program would look like. It laid it out conceptually from the principles, which we just, thank you, grateful, the packs, the roles, the community, the importance of having the community harnessed in behind ALUS, the farmer delivery, the farmer engagement, all of that is in this document. It's on our website. You should read it. It's amazingly powerful. When I tell people, you know, with that like if we're at a government office or something, I say you've got to read this Farmers Conservation Plan. It's like our Constitution, like the Americans would use a Constitution. It's a powerful document, and it still reads really, really well. And I think for me, at its core, this is the thing that really hooked me. We talk about how valuable nature is, but we live in Western society where we tend to be a little bit capitalist here, and the way we express value to one another is with money, right? So if we value nature, we should be able to value with dollars and cents. If we really care, that's the point. The economic premise of ALUS is if we value nature, we can get people on the landscape to put it back, lots of it. And I'm going to prove to you that we can do that, lots of it. And the second part of that premise is also an economic argument. If it has value, then it has a market value. And we're proving that point too, right? That we got the people, the actors that will develop the supply and economic language, and we know who's going to provide the demand. And this program puts a very human face around it and allows us to do this in a way that is comfortable for each and every one of us. I hope to God every one of you have had the same experience with this program that I have. Whether you've come in as just a community supporter, a conservation authority, a farmer, a coordinator, I hope you've had the same experience. That this program can turn us on and make us relevant like we never were before, right? It's exciting for me. It's really exciting for me to have learned a new language, to understand that my farm does more than just one thing. But most importantly, when my kids come home from school and they're supposed to kick my ass, you know, Dad, you're so behind the times. I kick theirs because we're ahead of these kids, and that's amazing. It's a cool place to be, right? Next, I've traveled across Canada extensively talking to ALUS communities, and I asked them, because they don't know me anywhere, and you don't know me anywhere, who owns ALUS? Who owns ALUS? And this concept I just found online this morning, that ownership is a set of beliefs, attitudes, behaviors. I think what that says to me is, because I've asked the question over and over and over again, and the audience tends to say to me, well, we own ALUS, right? It's not really a question of ownership, like we have title to it, but the beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors, we've all been galvanized around this set of principles in this program that speaks to all of us, right? That puts us in a position that we never were before and weren't considered of that position. I like that position. I like it a lot. You know, I like being part of a growing group of people across the country that are solving the world's most pressing problems. Now, by the numbers, sorry, I have to do my CEO stuff now. Today, 35 ALUS communities. We'll be going to 44, 46 before you turn around. 1,421 farmers. This is old data because we haven't done the new season yet. Next. From Dr. Yang, nutrient reductions in this sort of range, 50 to 100%, like water was really, really impacted by our work, really impacted. Carbon, we're going to get better at these numbers, but the numbers are still impressive. We're sinking carbon at these rates. But now the ones that are near and dear to me. Biodiversity. Increase in biodiversity and native species from the habitats that we put in place. And this really, really impressive number from Andrew McDougall's work on the pollinators in our restored prairies. The pollinators and beneficial insects respond by 300% in the first year in even quarter-acre patches of prairie. This biological response is instantaneous, and it leads the way for the birds to follow that are going to eat those insects, and the pollinators are going to help us, you know, grow our crops, et cetera, et cetera. That's why I like biodiversity, just example number one. It's an instantaneous response, and we did something very, very right. Next, collectively, we've impacted 37,600 acres. Again, a year ago data, but that number's not as impressive as this one. When you translate that to kilometers, square kilometers, it's 153 square kilometers. Rouge Park in Toronto, which has been established with a significant government investment, is 79 square kilometers. So we've done two relatively small national parks, but now we're on our way, right? Collectively on our way. Groups like you across the country doing the same thing under the same principles and finding a common cause. and the impacts are significant, suddenly. And again, to our role. As Canada's natural capital gets destroyed, your presentation on the natural capital loss, staying ahead of restoration, is kind of devastating, but at least we know our role, right? We know our role, please. Sorry? To do projects like this. And that project you guys put up was brilliant. But next. So, again, when we promote this program across the government country to people that pay the bills for us now, it's always this, and we provide this dynamic bundle of ecosystem services. Always, always, always. That's the value of nature-based solutions. That's the value of ALUS. That's what we do. That's why this program counts and why it matters more than, or not more, it matters an awfully lot. But again, back to this point, biodiversity. It's the leading indicator. Why? It's because it's our life support systems. Is this the fourth time the definition has gone up? This is kind of cool. I'm really glad I put this in now, you know? This is kind of different. Okay, next. From Andrew McDougall, again, back to my biodiversity point. This is the research that they've done. So the bottom, the green is hang on, I'll do what Drake did. This is good. This is over time, the response of biodiversity. This is response in water quality, improvements, and the carbon response is last. So over time, their research suggests that our efficacy builds in a wave. But again, as I mentioned over and over again, biodiversity comes first, right? Biodiversity indicates to me that these other things, we've done something very right, and that these other things are going to come. So, and it's absorbable, it's acceptable. Everybody likes to talk about habitat and wildlife and biodiversity, all that sort of thing. It takes the politics out of it, right? It takes the politics of climate out. It speaks to everybody, every single person in Canada. It's a great argument, and it's a great point of efficacy for us. And then some of the really, really cool stuff. I'm going to out-geek Drake here for just a minute. Hard to do. The superpower of fungus. Superpower of fungus. This is biodiversity too, right? Slide. This is a depiction of fungal growths in prairies on 5 sites in southern Ontario. My farm was one of them. That shows that these mycorrhizal hyphate fungi are absolutely essential to the proper restoration of biodiversity that helps plants function better and better and better. We didn't set out to do this, but it's a byproduct of what we're doing, that we can think even about the smallest organisms that we don't even understand. And the New York Times is now writing about the superpower we've been doing all along. Okay, and here's the data. The blue sites are the restored prairies for these fungi compared to the control sites, the regular fields. So I want to postulate for you that ALUS itself has a superpower, right? And the superpower is the most important part of biodiversity, and it's people, right? These people, like this Middlesex pack, that put on their cape and do superhuman works to solve the world's greatest problems in the most simple way, and they make it look easy, you know? This Elgin pack, somewhat more laissez-faire, sure. There's probably beer in a cooler here as well, but the same thing. But again, the point of ALUS is this. We impact biodiversity, we impact the planet by first engaging people like ourselves, right? And growing this community of people that are around this concept. People like me, right? That got started in the simplest way. I was not a good candidate for this program, but look at us go. I love some of these older pictures. Take next one. Look at Alyssa. Alyssa, you were so young then. And this one here, just stop on this one for a little bit. This one is cool because this was that event down at Port Stanley years ago when we had mead, free mead to drink. And the researchers, so Nigel Rain, the pollinator guy, Andrew McDougall does a lot of research for us. Dave, the great Dave Reed, the white-haired guy in the middle, the Hotchkisses, all that. This was a great event, and it really signaled a cool moment when the Hotchkisses donated the proceeds from the day towards the fledgling Elgin project. And that's how this thing grows. Slide. Look at these slides. This stuff here. We do something pretty simple at ALUS. We do something that's pretty familiar to us. We don't write reports. We don't publish papers. What we do is we harness the power of you with these. We put our hands in the dirt and make something happen. Something that's concrete and real, that we capture in acres, that people can understand and speak to habitat and biodiversity. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to have on your resume, right? We're the people with our hands in the dirt. And I also like the connectivity back to the funder community. I like to think that the funder community, and you can roll through these slides slowly, I think they get as jazzed about this as we do. I think they get as connected as we do because they're funding this program. So I'm excited about that. I mean, I see it pretty much up close and personal since, you know, I'm in a lot of the conversations where we raise the money. But this is just a list of some of the 45 funders that fund us at a national level. And that's not to mention all the local funding that's raised by the community partners across Canada, which is a significant amount of money. So community raising money, community sources, national sources. It's a kind of a really dynamic and cool thing and growing. Last two thoughts. Back up one. This community. I wanted to acknowledge Long Point, Kettle, Catfish, Lower Thames, Upper Thames, as representative of this community, right, that has come in and helped support this concept, among others, right? I highlight those, these conservation authorities, because I remember how difficult the concept it was in the beginning, right? It was not easy for us to find a relationship with Conservation Ontario and their affiliates, but we have, and I think it's powerful. Next, my proudest point of ALUS. There are in the room 9 people today that are under 30, I think. We're going to take some liberties, maybe. So just please, can I recognize you? Peter, just jump for a minute, please. Peter, Jumanah, all these people working now. Graham, Nicole, where are you? Nicole, moving to Saskatchewan. Coral, Alyssa, Chloe, where's Chloe? Chloe's here. Preston, the new guy. And Kirsten, where's Kirsten? Back there. Look, these are 9 of our best and brightest that have stayed home. They're making a difference in their home communities. For a change, we didn't ship our youngsters off to Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver where they have to go and make a living. We've kept them home. We've kept the best and brightest home. And we've created an economic opportunity around saving the planet. And that's a kind of cool place for me to finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, Bryan outside was telling me that he might have felt a little unpracticed, that he wasn't sure if he was going to do a good job. He just did a great job. So good. If we actually go back a slide in Bryan's presentation, you see this little photo here of the kids that were helping to plant. Oh my gosh, Bryan is taller than me. Help plant some pollinator plants. It's actually on this farm, so just the back field here behind these windows. Is a prairie planting project that we had done with wildflower farms here and a local school to bring out children and get them really interested in prairie habitat, but also restoration in general. And they were so involved in asking so many questions. So it's part of, I guess, our program as well to try to share our knowledge about the program, but hopefully get more people interested as well and starting them off young. So maybe they can stick around a little bit longer and we can get more of the best and bright working for ALUS. So this kind of concludes our speaker portion of the presentation. I want to thank you all for joining us today. It was great to see all of your faces here, and of course, thank you for joining us virtually as well. We've had a large turnout. And I want to thank again our contributors for making this day possible, and also acknowledge the work of Peter, Graham, and Preston for putting this whole event together as well. So thank you. A round of applause for you guys.
I share Sam's frustration and anger and urgency and panic and sadness and grief. And a big question of mine is capitalism, right? It's the elephant in the room. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it as a conservationist. We don't talk about capitalism. Sorry, yeah, as a conservationist. My question is is there potential for this carbon wave to be a tool of transition?
Out of our current understanding of capitalism, like under the current.
A tool of transformation of the current systems.
So I think capitalism is a little bit backwards when in comparison to how I view and live on the land. And it was actually brought here in first contact because everything for us was reciprocal, and that's why the lands thrived, because we had relationships with things. There was no concept of capitalism. It was a give and take. Bryan talked about a lot, reciprocal. And I don't understand how capitalism fits in that model. I think there's innovative solutions that some folks touched on, like nature-based solutions. And I know Carolinian Canada is using models, and ALUS as well is using models to bring financial solutions and green economy together. One of the big projects that we are using Creative Green Solutions would be the Conservation Impact Bond, which is also in partnership and empowers Indigenous communities and to continue to steward the lands while building capacity, and also allowing opportunities for the finance community to come into conservation. I think there's creative ways we can do a lot of things like that, but capitalism in general, I believe, it doesn't always fit into a reciprocal relationship.
I think the answer to your question, Coral, is depends. And for me, it depends where the value rests or nests or is generated. If the value that the carbon markets create rests with the people that actually sequester the carbon, then we might have a winner, a helpful tool to drive change. If it nests with the traders or the accountants, then we've got a problem, because the money's not flowing to the people that are creating the solutions. So we're working on that at ALUS ourselves. That very deep problem is, how do we make sure the value flows to the farm gate, to the people that are, solving the problems, right? So.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So 2 parts I see to that question. First is I sort of touched on my thoughts on carbon, and I come to that as a Master's of Science in Landscape Ecology. So it's not from a naive point where I think that the carbon part of the equation is overblown. I can very easily see a possible future scenario where we fix carbon through different techniques, including technology, and we have 350 parts per million carbon, and we still live on a degraded planet that doesn't offer us the optimal well-being and provisioning that we could have. And so I very much see that we're going to waste a lot of time and effort on carbon and not focus on healing as much as we need to. And so with that in mind, we're not going to tax our way out of this. It's not those aren't the tools that are going to get us there. Healing is the tool that's going to get us there. But at the same time, I don't think we're not in a place where we can do it without capitalism. Like, I started my farm 7 years ago. I came to it as a land gift, which is just to say that I'm not shackled with a big mortgage. But I thought I came to the game with a lot of money, And I very quickly spent $250,000, and I made 2 stops yesterday. I don't go off my farm very much. I made 2 stops yesterday. I spent $3,000 on seed and fencing. I spend $500 a year on boots because I put on a lot of miles and I wear my boots out. And selling meat with money is how people compensate me for the healing that I'm trying to do on land. And so while it's not all profit, like Bryan said, this is how we've chosen now to exchange energy and support each other. And we can philosophize about how to fix it, but we'll probably still be using money by the time my 40 years on the farm is over with. And so let's just work about compensating people. Let's spend our money to compensate people to do things that are in alignment with our values. You can spend money smartly, or you can spend money on feedlot beef at McDonald's.
So I just want to clarify, did you say meat or mead? Because there was talk of mead going around earlier, and I don't have a clue what mead is.
I keep my mead for myself,
Okay.
but it's fermented honey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I'll add my comment about this question. Sorry, is that all right? Want to move on, or? It's more generalized, not necessarily focused on carbon. So, disclaimer, I'm not a big fan of capitalism, but I think in its current form, it's failing us, not just individually, but us as a society. It's societal stagnation in its current form, where most of the people who are getting the benefits are at the top, of course, we all know this. I think it works better when you have a more democratically functioning capitalist system, and where the people who benefit from that system are the individuals that are using that system, not the people that are operating the system. I think that can be reflected in the environment as well as society in general.
I hear what you said about that, about it's fragmenting us and it feels stagnant, right? And when you were speaking, an image of a bicycle came to mind, maybe when you said democratic, not sure, but in meetings, in previous meetings that I was in a lot, I got the opportunity and the privilege to meet many different people, a lot of people in this room, from many different perspectives. And I did a lot of listening, and things are tense right now. And I'm just trying to say that, what am I trying to say? I'm doing a PhD in Indigenous health, and I don't say that from a position of authority or knowing or like expertise. I say that truly as a listener. I'm a bit stuck here. Okay. Thank you. That would be helpful.
So the question is, the landowner stewardship index showed a difference in conservation value of the stewards who received bird surveys and those who didn't. Can you speak more to why you believe this is? Do landowners who participate in the survey, or do they just receive results?
So the conservation, this person is referring to the graph that I had shown and the conservation land stewardship type, which was on the left side, showed this large discrepancy between people who have had bird surveys versus people who have not had bird surveys conducted in their woodlots. So I will start this off by saying perhaps it is a little bit biased, I will say that. The people who have had bird surveys generally contact us and already are very conservation minded. Of course, the stewardship scale is going to score much higher for those individuals. The people who have not had bird surveys for that analysis were people that were, I considered, a control group. They were a group of landowners from Eastern Ontario. We don't do surveys in Eastern Ontario. So they were very far removed from where we typically do our surveys. And those were the results of that, from those surveys between those two individuals. I'm hoping that I answered the question, but I feel like there's more to it that I forgot. Sorry. It was, you want? Yeah, I could repeat it just to make sure I answered everything that they wanted me to say.
So the question was, the landowner stewardship index shows a difference in conservation value with the stewards who received bird surveys and those who didn't. Can you speak more to why you believe this? Do landowners who participate in the survey, or do they just receive results?
Yeah, so the landowners do receive those, so I pretty much answered the question. The landowners do receive all the results that we get from our surveys. They receive them in a letter thanking them for the opportunity to survey with them, and sometimes if they have a species at risk, we'll put in a brochure indicating how to protect that species and how to maintain the habitat for that species. Currently, I'm currently talking to my supervisor about this right now, but right now it's, we have 2 study areas in Ontario. So the smaller area being the Frontenac Axis area, so this includes Frontenac Provincial Park and Queen's University Biological Station. And we are strictly doing cerulean warbler surveys there. 80% of the population of cerulean warblers occur in the Frontenac area within Canada, within Ontario, and they're only in Ontario, a little bit in Quebec. And then the other main areas are main area, which is southwestern Ontario down here, and we basically are stretched across the southern portion down towards, we stop at Chatham, Kent, and then move towards Pinery. So that's kind of the area of interest for us, for our 5 target species. We are currently looking to expand that to include more like Grey Bruce and Huron area, as well as the Niagara area. So we're working, hoping to be a bit more cyclical with our surveys in the areas. Excuse me, with our surveys. If a landowner wants to get into contact with and have a survey completed on their property, they can email me, ifife@birdscanada.org. And yeah, you're more than happy to contact me. I'm more than happy to do a survey for you, as long as you're in southern Ontario. I hear, yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody. Metaphor for ALUS is a cerulean warbler. It's an umbrella organization, and I mean that in the way that we protect farmers from the litigious, bureaucratic pressures so that they can do what they do best, which is love the land and their families. So someone asked me, where's the ALUS office? And I was like, it's home. And I meant that because I work from home, but it does also feel that way. So thank you, everybody. I think we're done.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you for your participation in the panel discussion, and thank you, Coral, for facilitating that. We had really good conversation, and it's always good to hear everybody's opinions and thoughts. So now it is actually dinner time. I'm not going to mess it up this time. So we thank everybody virtually. Hopefully they can see me over here. And thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us in person as well. So we'll wrap things up here. Give everybody a round of applause one more time. And the next following messages are just about the dinner time. So we'll say goodbye to everybody virtually here, and apologize. We're sharing food with you in our minds. So maybe we can eat dinner at the same time. Anyway, so We're hoping to get people in groups about 15 to approach the food truck, just so we don't like overcrowd the area. But feel free to walk the grounds and see the sights, enjoy some snacks, and head over to the food truck. And in the meantime, while you're walking the area and enjoying the sights, we do actually have an interactive map set up on the TV just outside this window that I'm pointing at. So you can feel free to go over to the TV and click around the map. It's a 360 view of 2 projects, one in Elgin County and one in Middlesex County. There are a few features we're hoping to bring attention to. So there are little icons you can click on and interact with that map and show, get a good idea of what's involved in the project planning and get a good look of what we have situated in Elgin and Middlesex County. So thank you everybody once again, and enjoy dinner and enjoy the grounds. So I'll herd you outside.